Here is successful global consultant and renowned author Andrew Miller talking to business owners and executives about how to accelerate growth and maximize profitability through operational excellence.
I guess it was about 11 and a half years ago or 11 years ago, we're on our honeymoon and we're deep in the jungle of Peru. We're about 2 hours from the smallest, tiniest town you can find, deep in the jungle. Any of you that have ever been there, you know, we're surrounded by the howler monkeys. That's all you ever hear. Night and day, howler monkeys, howler monkeys. You've got cockroaches literally the size of my fist that are crawling all over your stuff. The air is hot and dank, like you're walking through like a thick pea soup. That's the experience that we had, you know. So one dark night, it was actually our last night in the jungle, and one of the hotel staff, we're in like this jungle lodge with no walls, just a ceiling, no hot water. I mean, it was a tremendous experience. But on the last night, a very dark night, as you can imagine, there's really no lights, not much electricity. One of the hotel staff or one of the lodge staff come up to us in a bit of a panic and say, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, you need to rush back to your room, you need to get your valuables, and you need to be back here in 5 minutes. We have to evacuate the lodge. So we're freaking out. She basically said, don't worry about your clothes. Grab your passports, your cash, any other valuables you have, and you need to be back here in 5 minutes. No more than 5 minutes, because we're evacuating the entire lodge. So we're, of course, freaking out. We're in the middle of nowhere. We're 2 hours from a small town, not even from a big town, 2 hours from a small town up the Amazon River. So, of course, we rush back, we grab our stuff, we get back, and literally under the cover of darkness, there's about 35 guests that are evacuated into 2 longboats on the river. And as we're walking, of course, we're trying to figure out what's going on. We found out that 4 armed men were on their way to the lodge to rob us and do whatever else they might do in the middle of the jungle with no protection. So, of course, we're freaking out. The staff are extremely calm, like this has happened before, right? So we're my wife and I look at each other and go, if this has happened before, why is it happening again? But, we're thankful that they're calm and they're shuttling us down. So we get into these longboats and they tell you that you have to duck down because now we have about 2 or 2.5 hour ride upriver, where the river's not that wide for any of you that have been there, maybe 100 feet wide. So anybody that's got a gun or good vision can see it's probably 9 o'clock at night, it's pitch black. So they tell us we have to duck down and stay below the sides of the boat so that anybody on the river can't see that there's anybody in them. So I can honestly tell you that was the longest 2 hours of my life. And me, the proud Canadian who thinks he's a tough guy, I'm sitting there with my Swiss Army knife, right? I've got the largest blade of the Swiss Army knife open, thinking, what? And I said to my wife, you just stay behind me, I've got you, right? If the knife doesn't work, those tiny little scissors will for sure, right? I've got you, right? Doesn't matter what they've got, I'm good, right? So of course that's what's going through my head. So finally we get to the outpost, which is where we're supposed to get off for the tiny little town, because it was the staff's responsibility to get us out of there safely. And I guess safety, the definition of safety was we get you to this tiny little town, and that's where the police are going to come and go take care of the matter. So we pull up, and we're thinking, okay, we're safe, we're okay. We're still freaking out a little bit about, there are a bunch of staff that had stayed back, what's going to happen to them. Of course, all of our clothes were still there with all of our, with our knapsacks and everything. We've got 2 weeks left in our trip and just the clothes on our back left. And I'm saying, but don't worry, the police are going to handle it, like everything's going to be fine. So as we're walking up the walkway to sort of get to this, and I'll say hotel in quotation marks that we're going to stay at, we see the police, and I put that in quotation marks as well, because it was seven men, 1 gun, and 1 bulletproof vest amongst the 7 of them. And these were the guys that were going to go take care of the 4 armed gunmen coming. So I clearly said to myself, this is very different than how I would define 4 armed men and a problem if it's 7 guys, 1 gun, and 1 vest, who I still have a 2-hour trip up the river. So we go to bed. Like I said, we're still worried about our stuff. We're still worried about the staff that so bravely stayed behind to protect the lodge. And we wake up the next morning, really not sure what's going to happen, because nobody could really tell us. This was at probably midnight by the time we got to the hotel. We wake up, we open the door to our hotel room, and what's there? Our bags. Our bags are perfectly packed for us. My stuff is in my bag, my wife's stuff is in her bag. We go downstairs with our bags. So that's, take a deep breath. Okay, our stuff's here. We go downstairs, and who's there waiting to greet us? All the staff from the hotel. Wow. Finely dressed as they were at the hotel, big smiles on their faces. Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Miller. Is there anything we can get you? And my mind was blown. Because throughout all of the stuff that they had to endure, and we later on found out what happened, but over the course of sort of the 6 or 7 hours that we were sleeping, not only were they protecting the lodge, but they were also packing up all the guest stuff. 35 of us had our stuff waiting for us when we got there. And they had big smiles on their faces like this was the best day in the world. So my point is that excellence is a mindset. We're fortunate, at least I hope we're all fortunate in the sense that we don't have people shooting at us. But in the midst of all of this trouble that they had to deal with, that excellence, that service still came through. They still packed they didn't shove my stuff into a bag. It was folded, it was neatly packed, everything was there, and they had big smiles on their faces when we woke up. And I can't even imagine what they had to endure after the stories that we heard. But so the point being is, we're fortunate we don't have people shooting at us, so we have no excuse not to pursue excellence. If people who are literally having people shooting at them, wanting to come and rob them and kill them, are able to pursue excellence in light of that, then we have no excuse. So that's my start.
Well, how did the story end?
The story ends that everybody was fine. They ended up actually beating up a couple of the locals to try and find the quickest way to get there. They showed up. I guess some other community members and locals had come to protect the lodge as well, because it's a pretty tight community in there. And they defended it. And I mean, by the time they got there was nothing to take, right? Because all the guests were gone. So there were no valuables. They could have taken our clothes, but they sort of showed up. The staff were ready, the locals were ready, and there was nothing to take. So they sort of just, pushed them back, and that was the last we heard. But we did hear a couple of people had gotten pretty severely beaten, but we're going to be fine. So at the end of the day, it was a good story. But the important message is the excellence message. Under all that duress, their focus was still on the customer. But I'm going to give you 3 ways to accelerate growth through operational excellence today. And we'll talk about each of them for about 20 or 30 minutes. The reason I've got you at tables is you're going to do a little bit of work with the people at your tables just to help you in your own organization, your own business, advance a little bit so you come out with something tangible. But the reason I want to focus on these 3 things, the reason I like them is because they require no new capital or financial investment. That's why I call it operational excellence. It's growth through your existing operations. It's just looking at things differently. It's changing the mindset you have around how you approach different areas of your organization, whether it's your customers, whether it's your employees, whether it's your processes. We look at things differently in order to be able to improve our performance, which of course leads to financial improvement, whether it's growth, whether it's maximizing profitability. So the first thing I want to talk about is, we'll start with a general theme of prioritization, but really what it comes down to is finding your one priority. So, a lot of organizations I work with, we get into this discussion, this push-pull about prioritization. I'm already working on 5 things, and then something else comes up, so I just end up working on a 6th thing. And what I advise my clients is, you've got to start with one thing, one priority, right? That can only come from knowing what your ideal future state is. So there's 3 questions we have to think about when we talk about identifying your one priority. The first question is, what is my ideal future state? So if I'm sitting here 12 months from now, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now, where's my organization at? What's the ideal future state for my organization? It could be anything, and that's something that I'm going to get you guys to think about over the next few minutes. It isn't necessarily just a metric. It isn't, we want to grow by 10%. That could be it, but it's a little deeper than that. And I'll give you a couple of examples of what I mean to give you a little context around that. But that's the first question when you're talking about your one priorities. What's my ideal future state? The second question is, what is the fastest way for me to achieve it? So that's when you really start talking about strategies. That second question is, what is the fastest way for me to achieve that ideal future state? Now, I might put as a side order to that question, most effective. So fastest and most effective. We don't only want to talk about speed, but it's a very important component of it. If I can figure out a way to achieve that ideal future state in 6 months versus 12, all of you as business owners or senior executives in big companies understand that that's valuable. If I can do something twice as fast, I'm going to be able to do it. The third question we have to think about then is also, how do we continue to make progress? So that word, I'll use the word sustainability. So what's my ideal future state? What's the fastest way for me to get there? And how do I keep making progress towards that ideal future state? Now, you may have heard that I say strategy is organic, meaning that ideal future state might change. So the big mindset shift around operational excellence is that we have to be pursuing excellence, not perfection. Because if we pursue perfection, I could tell you that only one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to reach that perfection, or you're going to fail because you didn't reach perfection. Now, in reality, only one of those things ever happens, which is you fail because you didn't reach perfection, because it's virtually impossible to be perfect, right? Even if you think the best baseball players in the world only get a hit 3 out of 10 times. The best free throw shooters in basketball still miss 1 out of 10 times. Think of whatever analogy works for you, and anybody who's the best at what they do still misses sometimes. So we can't be pursuing perfection. We have to be pursuing excellence. When we pursue excellence, we can continue to redefine it. So we achieve a certain level of excellence, then we say, okay, now we need to raise the bar again. We achieve another level of excellence, we need to raise the bar again. We can continue to raise the bar. If you're trying to achieve perfection, there's no bar to raise. You either get there or you don't. And unfortunately, most of the time, we don't get there, which tends to look like a failure, even though there's been significant progress that's been made. So it all starts with that mindset change. So I want to tell you about, I'll give you a quick client example. Let's call the client John. So John, in terms of ideal future state, the work that we did was focused on how do we continue to increase the membership base of his organization. So this was a national organization, health and fitness and aquatic centers, and John was responsible for 3 of those centers just outside of Toronto. So the focus, the ideal future state was, how do we continue to grow the membership? And this organization, fantastic reputation, has been around forever. Every single one of you will know exactly what the organization is when I tell you. But it also is a very mission-based organization, meaning that it was trying to be everything to everybody. So for those of you that may have worked for or are running an organization or have run an organization in the past that tries to be everything to everybody, you realize that it's very difficult to maintain growth when you're trying to do that. Because when you're trying to deliver the same message to everyone, it doesn't resonate with the key people that you want it to resonate with. So in John's case, the focus was we want to continue to increase the membership base. We want to increase retention of new members. We want to grow the membership base. We want to get more and more people through the door of the facilities. So we realized, looking at demographics information, look at geographic information, all the data that we had captured, that the way to do that was to focus on a certain segment of the population. Now that segment happened to be families with kids 12 and under. And we realized that both from a demographics perspective, from a programming perspective, from a growth perspective, that was the area of growth that was the biggest opportunity for John's 3 facilities, because they were specific to those areas. So that becomes the one priority. The one priority is growing the membership base by attracting and retaining families with kids 12 and under. So that way, when you're thinking about strategies, you think about, does that align with this target market? If we want to do a marketing campaign, if we want to do a discount program, if we want to bring in new programs to any of our facilities, John and his leadership team now have that baseline, that question they can ask themselves: does it help us faster and or more effectively get to this demographic, this target market of families with children 12 and under? So John, maybe if I can call on you and just let you speak briefly about some of the results that came out of now having this, I guess, more laser-like focus on the specific demographic. This is John, by the way.
Yeah.
Obviously, identifying the ideal future state, using that as a baseline for implementing strategies around it, but also making sure that you have the right metrics to show that you're making progress towards that. So John had mentioned one, we looked at obviously new admissions, new memberships, but also looking at retention within the first year, because that was somewhere we had found there was a big opportunity. So we said if we're able to retain members better in the first year, the numbers show that once they get to the second, third year, the retention rate becomes a lot higher. So again, building that baseline further. I think the only other thing I might mention, I think you had mentioned a couple of times, is the clarity with the board of directors now.
Yeah.
Being able to very clearly say to your advisors and your board of directors, this is the direction that we're going. And I think the indirect benefit of that was, whereas the board may have been too focused on the day-to-day tactical stuff, by having that clear direction, they were able now to really be strategic advisors, which is really what you want.
Thank you.
So if we boil it down to say, again, the three key components of that, and the reason I asked John to speak was just to give you a bit of context and a specific example around how it works. I actually had another client that was going to be here today, but maybe I'll brag a little bit. The reason he couldn't be here, he called me last night. He said, I've gotten so much new business through the work that we did together that I can't be here this morning. So let me give myself a little shameless plug, which is a good thing, right? It's a good thing. So I said, all right, well, if that's the reason you're not here, then I'll forgive you this time. But so again, the three key things is, I'll use the word identity, but it's really identifying your ideal future state. So again, if we're here 6 or 12 months from now, how is your organization different? What does it look like? Are you the number one player in your market? Those are the kinds of things we have to think about, right? So if we go back to John's example, it was we need to continue to grow the membership base, right? So we could say we want to grow our customer base, we want to increase retention, we want to identify our high potential employees better, whatever it means. What's that ideal future state? Each one of you in the room is going to have a different one. Speed. What's the fastest way for us to get there? So we've got identity, we've got speed, and then the third is, like I said, sustainability. So how are you going to stay on track to sustain that progress that you're making? Because you've now identified your ideal future state. You've identified and determined what's the fastest way to achieve it, but now you have to have some sustainability to it. So what are we going to do to continue to make sure we make progress towards those success measures, those metrics, those indicators that we've put in place that are going to show success? So those are the three key things to think about. Now, just tell a little bit about your business, get some feedback on maybe the biggest opportunity or challenge that you see, as Charles, I think, really opened the door for us when he said, the challenge I have is that there's people up the street who are much bigger companies that are doing it for a little less. So my challenge is, how do I differentiate myself? So if you've got something that you really say this is the biggest opportunity or challenge, throw that out early, because that'll be great to get feedback from your table partner. It's great for everyone else to see sort of what everyone else is going through, and hopefully you all pulled something out, even though your businesses may be completely different, but in terms of how to approach it. And really, to me, it always comes down, that's why I say it's that one priority. We could talk about prioritization, multiple priorities. It's got to start with that one. And the reason that I wanted to spend, half the time that we're together this morning on this first point, because I did tell you I'm going to give you three. We're still only on the first one. But it's the foundation. It's the foundation of any successful business, is what is your ideal future state? Because without that, you're making decisions in a vacuum. And you're making decisions, sounds good, but if you don't have it focused on, does it help us get to where we're trying to get to, then you look at it afterwards and say, well, why did it fail? Well, I can tell you why it failed, because it didn't help you get to where you needed to be. So, yes?
What's the ideal future state? What timeline do you normally think about? Are you thinking 12 months, 5 years?
I wouldn't think 5 years. I think 5 years is who knows what's going to happen in 5 years, right? So, I mean, to me, it's six to 12 months at most.
Yes.
I mean, so when I'm talking to my clients about this, John could probably attest to this. When we talked about ideal future state, it's, if we're sitting around the table 6-12 months from now, what's changed?
So and that's a moving target as well, right?
Absolutely. And so that's what I was going to sort of close with. So it's a nice segue. Thanks, Ron. Is that it is like excellence we talked about, you raise the bar. Your ideal future state can change. right? So that's why I say strategy is organic. I'm not a big fan of we're going to do a 5-year strategic plan. In our world, it may have made sense 20 years ago. In our world today, it makes no sense, especially for those of you that are in technology. I mean, you wake up tomorrow and the technology is different. Well, even if it's manufacturing or IT services or whatever it might be, I mean, you wake up tomorrow and somebody in India has done something while you were sleeping that's completely changed the nature of your business. You hadn't heard of it. There you go, right? And I didn't even know that, but that's the way the world is these days, right? It's a lot easier to come up with something that's a value-added service that people are going to jump onto. So I think it's very important for you to constantly be readdressing this and saying, okay, this is my ideal future state now. And then in a month, 2 months, and with your leadership teams or on your own, with your advisors, you have to constantly be saying, is this still our ideal future state, or has it changed?
And
Yes.
just a quick question.
Sure.
When you identify your one priority, do we look at, because I think people often get confused. And you know, the companies I've been working for and consulting, I find that they are confused. I just want to know what's the right approach.
Sure.
So when you're identifying that one priority, are you looking for what you want to see in terms of an outcome as a priority, or as a value-added something that will lead you to that? So let me give an example. Are you looking at enhancing your customer focus or being more patient-centric, family-centric, whatever, enhancing that? And if you did that, it will lead to increase in your volumes and market share and all that. So,
Okay. So I'll reframe it a bit and just give you, so let's assume that you've identified what your ideal future state is.
yeah.
I think that the ideal future state would more relate to what you just said, which is we want to be the #1 company in patient safety or whatever. Like that, it's not a mission statement, it's something more tangible than that.
Yeah.
When you're talking about what your one priority is, assuming already you've got that ideal future state, to me it's one question. What's the fastest way for us to get there? So in John's case, we talked about the ideal future state is membership growth, customer growth, whatever word you want to use. The fastest way to get there is to attract and retain this certain group of people, which is families with kids under 12. So that to me is John's one priority, is we need to attract and retain families with kids 12 and under. So again, you're going to do marketing campaigns, you're going to do other things. Other people are going to come into his whys. But the biggest growth potential, the biggest opportunity for him to increase membership growth was with that area. So that way, if somebody comes and says, well, we want to do this program for seniors, and just to harp on John's specific business, we want to do this or that, it's very easy for John or his leadership team to say, is that the fastest way for us to get here? Is it faster or more effective than targeting families with kids 12 and under in terms of membership growth? If the answer is no, you move on, right? Which actually is a nice segue into my next point. So the second way that we can accelerate growth through operational excellence is improving the quality of our ideas. So I'll start with asking you a question. How do you know if an idea is a good one?
It gets you towards your point number 1.
You're stealing my material. Okay, so we've got resonates with your customer. It gets you closer to your ideal future state. My experience with lots and lots of organizations is the reason that they spend lots of time going down the road and pursuing and implementing what I'll call bad ideas is because they don't have a framework for deciding or determining whether or not the idea is a good one. So this is the framework that I use with clients. Alignment, to Reiner's point. Does it align with your ideal future state? That's the first, actually I'm going to put align. That is a yes or no question. That is the only question that matters first. So if you are trying to determine whether or not an idea is a good one, the first question you should be asking yourself is, does it align with my ideal future state? That's why it's so important, and that's why I spent the first half of today on the ideal future state, because that is the foundation for literally every decision you make afterwards. Yeah.
Observation from many strategy sessions. You said they're bad ideas. A lot of ideas get implemented because they're good ideas without actually looking if they're good ideas towards.
Right. And so I'm defining good idea, bad idea differently.
Right, but I think it sets a mindset where, oh, that's a good idea versus,
Right.
well, that's obviously a bad idea. You got to get them back. There's good ideas that are
Absolutely.
bad ideas.
Yes, and I'll give you another framework to clarify that as well. But yeah, that's the way I'm defining it, saying to say it's a good idea is really just saying it in a vacuum. So there's almost sort of a second part of that question, which is it a good idea for us? Right? So let's think of the Segway. Those of you know the Segway is that two-wheeler thing that was made famous by, what was it, Paul Blart Mall Cop? Have you ever seen that movie? My kids love that movie. Thank you very much. That on the surface is a fantastic idea. I mean, it's sort of taking the skateboard and the bike to a whole other level. It's really cool. The technology's awesome. It's, from what I've never been on one before, and I understand it's pretty safe to use, pretty easy to use. They can't make any money, right? They expected, I think when it first came out 6 or 7 years ago, analysts were saying this is going to be the fastest company to $1 billion in sales ever. I don't even think they're at $1 billion in sales now. I think they're still at 100,000 units, a couple 100,000 units. They just got bought out by a Chinese competitor. Nobody's quite sure how much money it was for. But the bottom line is they're not making a whole lot of money. They're certainly not making any profit. And their revenue numbers are not anywhere close to what they thought it would be. So that's where it starts with, yes, good idea in a vacuum, but now 7, 8, 9 years later, can we say it was a good idea or not? Depends how you determine whether or not it's a good idea. So it starts with the alignment. First question you should be asking yourself is, does this initiative, does this strategy, does this idea align with our ideal future state? If and only if the answer is yes, do you move on to the other three? If the answer is no, I would advise you as my clients, as my friends, as my colleagues, as my peers, to just forget about it. If it doesn't align with what you're trying to do, it either means in the context of that particular idea and your business, it's a bad idea. Either that or your ideal future state is wrong. You're putting time, money, effort, people into an idea that's not helping you progress towards your ideal future state. So why would you put any time, effort, and money into it? Assuming it does align, which lots of ideas do, then you have to think about the impact. So that gets to, Raj, I think you talked about customer resonance. Laurence mentioned that. So demand, right? So what's the impact of the idea? That might be purely financial in the sense that we're going to increase profitability, we're going to increase volume, we're going to grow, we're going to bring on new customers. But there also could be another element of that around, let's call it retention. Is the impact going to help us retain our existing customers better? Is it going to help us retain our people better, right? Is there an empowerment, an engagement thing? Is there a non-financial impact? It's going to increase our reputation as a thought leader in the marketplace, right? There's certain things that I do, that each of your organizations probably do, which may not have a pure financial component to it. But it does align with your ideal future state because it gives you better repute, better profile within the industry. The next question is, or point is capability. Is the organization capable of doing it? Not feasibility. That's why I make a difference between feasibility and capability. This is your own organization. Do you have the right people? Do you have the right skills? Do you have the right ability to do it? So this is organizational capability. Can we even get people to do this? If it is aligned, we think that it's got enough impact that we're going to implement it. Do we have the right structure, the right people, the right way to do this so that it can be successful? And these three, by the way, are not in any particular order. Like I said, the first one is the hurdle. Once you pass it, you really have to look at all three of these. They're not in any particular order. The third is feasibility. Is it feasible? Can it be done? Right? We want to launch a new service to our customers. Is it even possible? Has anybody done it before? Right? So if you think of Elon Musk 20 years ago or whatever it was saying, we're going to start building luxury electric cars. Well, it had never been done before. There would be a feasibility question there. Is it even possible? Sure, it's possible to build them, but is it even possible for people to recharge them and drive them? So that's where the feasibility question comes in, is it even possible for us to do this? Because a lot of times what you want to make sure you're doing is you're encouraging ideas from your people. And then once they have an idea of how those decisions are going to be evaluated, then they continue to give ideas. Because even if you don't move forward with a particular idea, initiative that somebody suggested, they understand exactly why. The impact wasn't big enough, it's not technologically feasible, it doesn't align with our ideal future state.
I would say though that feasibility factor is probably the riskiest one, right, to consider. But I think the upside is that if you're first to market with something that's never been invented before or provided before, then you've hit the home run, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's innovation.
Right. And so you're right, and that's so the feasibility in that case sort of aligns a bit with capability to say, well, it's never been done before. So feasibility also can mean we're in a market where regulatory just doesn't allow it, right? So that's why I'm saying it's feasible, like we want to launch a new medical device. Well, we can't do that unless it gets, approved by Health Canada. And Health Canada doesn't approve medical devices like the one that we're talking about, right? So, or you're right, you have the risk-reward discussion to say, well, it's feasible, but no one's ever done it before. So what's the impact? What's the capability? How does it get us? How does it position us differently if we decide to take the risk and go ahead and do it, right? Is the reward big enough, right? So if you're going to say, well, I'm going to be first to market, I'm going to have to invest all this time and money, and the market is, 20,000 people over the course of North America. Is that a big upside? What's the impact? My impact is I can make $1 million. Great. It's a lot of work for me to make $1 million, right? So that's where that impact question becomes so important. Okay, any questions? Does this look like something that would be useful to use in your organization, just to have a bit more disciplined approach on how you determine what a good idea is, what a bad idea is? If yes, what do you think you need to do to get there? What do you need to do to implement this, to use it? Is it as simple as going back to your office this afternoon and saying, all right, folks, here's how we're going to start making decisions? Or what do you see as maybe a barrier to using, I'll call this a framework or a process, whatever you want to use?
People are set in their ways, right? People are fall back on what's familiar to them and what they've been doing up to this point. So it might mean a bit of a change.
Bit of a change.
Right.
We're all change catalysts, right?
We are.
We have to be.
We do.
Any other thoughts? So just to frame it a little bit, I've used this charts with lots of clients and lots of audiences, and I think people, in terms of framing what and I'll use the word opportunity is, and maybe sometimes it opens people's eyes a little bit as to why they need to change. So we've got two factors that we're considering here. The quality of your ideas, are they high or are they low? And your ability to execute or implement those ideas. Do you have a strong ability to execute or a poor ability to execute? And so I've used very sophisticated labeling for the chart, right? Quadrants 1, 2, 3, and 4. So just to explain it very quickly, if you have a low quality of ideas and a poor ability to execute them, you're obviously in quadrant 1. The place that I would assume that everybody wants to be, and I know where I'd want to be, quadrant 4, where you have a high quality of ideas and you have a strong ability to implement and execute those ideas. Now again, going back to what we talked about earlier, you have to reframe how you think about what your quality of ideas are. The more you use the framework here, and I'll go back if those of you are still drawing, the more you use, and whether you use these 4 or some other decision-making criteria, it's okay by me. I won't be insulted. But the more you use the discipline of saying, here's the 4 or 5 criteria we're going to use to determine whether or not an idea is a good one, the more likely you're going to move yourself closer to quadrant 4. So when I do this with clients or big groups, the majority of people put their organizations in quadrant 3. They say, yes, we think we have a very high quality of ideas, but we always struggle to implement them, right? A few people are shaking your heads. You might agree with that. And I've done this with probably 20 different audiences, anywhere from this size to 250 people. And I would say 3/4 of the people end up assigning themselves in quadrant 3. And what I say to them, which is the same thing as I'll say to you, without the context of what we talked about on the previous sheet, your ideas aren't as good as you think they are. So whether you use the word bad idea, good idea, they're not as good as the quality of your ideas isn't as good as you think they are because you don't have anything to measure it against. You're saying it sounds like a great idea that I'm going to build a two-wheeler electronic device that's going to move people around. It sounds like a great idea. It's like, that's super cool. I would buy one, right? But if you're a car company, it's not a very good idea. If your ideal future state is we want to be the number one technology company in managed services, or we want to be the number one auto manufacturer, then building a two-wheel people-moving device doesn't pass that first hurdle, right? It doesn't align with the direction that we're trying to go. So that's why it's so important, that alignment question. Everything else sort of flows from there. But I wanted to give you that framework because that's what I tell anyone who will ask, anyone who will listen. The reason you put yourself in this category is because your ideas aren't as good as you think they are, because you're not comparing them against anything. Once you start comparing them against anything, those factors and really where you want to be, it becomes so much easier to implement those ideas because you've done it in a thoughtful way. You've said to yourself, instead of just coming up with this pie-in-the-sky idea that sounds like a great idea when I throw it out to my leadership team, you haven't even analyzed whether or not you can implement it. You don't even have a framework for deciding whether or not it's a good idea. But then once you do this, you say, well, does it align with our ideal future state? Yes. What's the impact? Well, we think we can sell 250,000 units of this in the first 18 months. Okay, that sounds pretty good. We have the right people because we're strong project managers. We have the right technical expertise to build it. We've got the right customer service people to test it. And it's feasible. The technology exists. We just have to tweak it, build it, put three things together and make something new out of it, whatever that might be. So now all of a sudden you're saying it aligns, it's got enough value that it's worth doing, we're capable of doing it, and it's feasible. So you can see how now all of a sudden your ability to execute moves further and further to the right. It becomes a lot easier for you to implement those ideas because you've given them the test to say, does this make sense for us to do as a business?
You have capability up there.
Mm-hmm.
What jumps into mind is people going, oh yeah, my organization is really capable,
Yeah,
as opposed to thinking how much effort it actually takes.
right.
Is that a common problem?
It is, but what I'm suggesting is you have to make a conscious effort to think about your organization's capability in the context of the strategy, the initiative, the idea that you're talking about. So I agree with you. I think every one of us here and almost every company I've ever spoken to would say, of course we have the capability. But okay, do you have the capability to build a Segway prototype within the next 3 months that's going to work at the Detroit Auto Show or wherever it's going to be launched? That, once you reframe the question and make it a lot more specific, it's a lot harder to answer, yes, we've got all the right people. Okay, well, do you have the right design people? Do you have the right... So you have to thoughtfully think about it, as opposed to just, are we capable, yes or no? It's all part of, thinking about these four factors, it's not a 2-minute discussion. This has to be, if you think about it in the context of your business, if you're meeting with your leadership team or you're going on a retreat, this needs to be the focus of it. We really have to talk about, so I'm giving them at a very high level. Each of these has to be drilled down to say, what's the impact? What's the size of the potential market? Are we going to be taking market share for existing companies? Are we going into a new market that doesn't exist? All of that stuff has to be done. Now, I'm not talking about weeks and weeks or months and months of analysis. I think that's way over analysis. But I think you have to have the right people in your organization sitting down and asking themselves these questions. And even if it's you and your right-hand person, just saying, all right, do we think we've got it in the context of this particular idea, not just in general? Does that? Okay.
Sometimes you're missing resources.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I'll make one last comment. The other thing, which I've noticed certainly mid to large size organizations do, is when they talk about capability and feasibility, they often say, well, who's going to be available to work on this, right? So, I used to work for a big consulting firm. You've probably heard about the bench. Those of us that weren't on projects were on the bench. You're sitting on the bench waiting for work to come or trying to find it. a lot of organizations look at their bench when a new initiative comes up and says, well, who's going to be available to work on it? And I think that's one of the single biggest mistakes you can make. Because you have to be, you know, you look at a sports team, when the game is on the line, they're not looking at their bench. They're looking at their top performers, right? Those of you that might be Raptor fans, you know, they're not looking at Terrence Ross and Bismack Biyombo when the game's on the line in a playoff game. They're looking at their two all-stars. So when you think of that in the context of your own organization, and you say, well, we do have this new important idea, because it's important, if it's made it through this funnel, it's an important idea. It aligns, it's got impact, you can do it, it's feasible. This, you know, for all intents and purposes, this should be a new big idea that's a big opportunity for you. So you don't want to put your bench people on that. You want to put your top people on that. You might want to put some bench people on it to help them develop. But you want to put this in the hands of people that you know are going to do it right. So it isn't about who's available, it's about who should be on it. Who should be working on this so that we increase our chances of success dramatically.
I was just going to say, I must admit, that as you were talking about this framework, and I'm thinking in my head, oh, this is really good for the corporate for-profit. But as I listen to you, and I'm thinking, this is very applicable even to the not-for-profit sector.
It's applicable for everybody.
Exactly. So as I
That's
was
why
going
I like
through
it.
it, I love it.
That's right.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah.
Fantastic. A new fan. As I said, your ability to implement and execute ideas is in direct correlation to how well they align with your business and going through that framework in terms of impact. The third point I want to talk about, I guess the third way that I promised you about accelerating growth through operational excellence, is what I call operational transparency. And it's basically the same as it sounds if I were to use the same words and just put them in a different order. It's how transparent are you about the way that you operate as an organization. So I think about this in the context of failure work. And the more transparent you are, the less failure work you do, the less administrative burden you have on your organization. So I'm going to give you 3 factors, and then I'll give you a couple of examples that might help put this into context a little bit. But when I'm thinking about operational transparency, I think of useful information. So do you have information that would be useful for people if you shared it? The second is accuracy of that information. So I may have information that's useful, but if it's not accurate, then not only am I misleading, but I'm probably hurting my organization's reputation. And then the third, I'll just say, improve customer experience. So if I've got useful information that's accurate and it will improve the customer experience, or I guess say and or in the terms of the third one, will it reduce my own organization's failure work? That's what I mean by operational transparency. So let me give you a couple of quick examples just so it makes sense for you. Think about FedEx or UPS. And let's rewind the clock, let's say probably 10, 12 years ago, if you've ever sent a package with FedEx or UPS. What do you think the number one question the customer service reps at FedEx and UPS got from their customers? Where's my package? Okay? Do you think they ever get a question now about where's my package? So what did they do? They shared information with their customers. They give you a tracking number and they give you a website. And now you can go and you can find out where your package is anywhere from the post office you dropped it off at to the end result with the signature online. So I'll tell you, this is brilliant for 2 reasons. One is, not only does it and I didn't write it down, but not only does it significantly reduce the administrative burden on FedEx and UPS employees, it's probably taken out 80% of the questions that they had to deal with. Where's my package? They'd have to look it up. Every call takes 5-10 minutes. So that's been completely eliminated now. So not only does it reduce what I would consider to be failure work, because it is failure work, they know where the package is, they're just not sharing the information with you. As soon as you pick up the phone and call and say, where's my package? They're able to look it up and find you and tell you it's in Pennsylvania, it's in Toronto, wherever it is. They know where it is. They just didn't share it. So they've reduced all of that failure work, all of that administrative burden. But I think what may be even more important is they've now empowered the customer to take control of that information. So not once when I'm sending a package with FedEx or UPS or any of those other, even Canada Post that does it, not once am I thinking, this is such a burden for me. I'm looking up my own information. It's 11 o'clock at night. You know, I had my books shipped here. I'm looking online saying, I know that they need to be there. I want them there by Thursday. So yesterday I'm looking up online saying, where are they? All right, they're delivered. That's not a burden on me. I'm not saying, why are these guys trying to push all of this stuff on me? I'm saying, this is fantastic. This is improving my experience as a customer.
You know, the Canada Post is now working on drive-throughs.
Yes, I heard that.
They've got a few drive-through locations where you can just basically drop off your package.
Right.
And away you go. You don't have to even leave your car.
Right.
And maybe there's a Tim Hortons beside it, I don't know.
The challenge with that, though, just to sit on that point, I use FedEx a lot. FedEx will come to my house, right? I leave the box on my porch with the thing, and FedEx picks it up. So that's it's the next, it's progress, but that's still what they're competing against, right? So I think that, so in the context of operational transparency, I hope that gives you a little more insight what I mean, because that not only, so useful information, yes, it's my tracking number, so they could tell exactly where my package is. Is it accurate? Well, I sure hope so, right? I'd like to believe that UPS and FedEx and Canada Post are providing accurate information, which it usually is. Does it improve the customer experience? Absolutely, because now I'm empowered and I'm engaged to do it myself. And the benefit to UPS, FedEx, Canada Post is it also significantly reduces the administrative burden on them.
This is a funny one in that something that's so obvious once they've done it. One of the companies is now with these emails you get, so I get email tracking number with a shipment. Reduced cost, I think, I'd love to see the numbers. How often have the package doesn't arrive, or you don't know exactly when the package is going to get there, so you don't know, you have it delivered to your house, can't be there that day. Well, this email now tells you it's going to be there tomorrow. Do you want to reroute it?
Right.
So you can,
Yeah.
Great.
Right?
because so many times something comes up with the kids, whatever, you're going to be somewhere else, just send it to that location, I'll pick it up, or my grandparents, and I'll pick it up there.
Because you're right, because what's the most frustrating thing? I hate coming home and seeing a notice on my door that says, sorry we missed you, you now need to go pick this up somewhere else. Right?
try to deliver twice. What's the
Right.
cost of that?
Totally. And so when I get that, and so it's a very good point. So when I get that notice on my door, and you all start smiling because you know exactly when I get that notice on my door, I do think in my mind, they're putting the onus on me. That's not empowering me. That's not improving my experience as a customer. I'm frustrated because Canada Post has shown up twice for something that's probably a $6 book that I ordered from Amazon or whatever it is, right? Or Indigo or whatever it might be. And they for whatever reason, their rules say they can't leave it on my front porch,
But they can.
right?
They can
Well,
sign the-
but you know what I'm saying? But you have to sign it in advance. If I don't know what's coming,
Yeah.
somebody sends me something that I don't know I'm getting, it shows up, there's a little notice that says, now I've got to take it's 15 minutes out of my day. Granted, it's not a big deal, but I've got to drive to the nearest post office, I've got to get it, I've got to wait for the guy to fumble in the back to try and find it.
You don't even know what
right?
it is.
Well, that's the whole point, right? Could be a letter bomb, right?
That's actually what they said. It was the form you could sign and have it, that you
Right.
weren't there, and just stick it to your door.
But I'm not there, right? And I don't know what's, yes, right. But so my point is, that's the difference between what I'm talking about with operational transparency. That clearly is putting the burden on the customer, not to their advantage, but to their detriment. Whereas UPS, FedEx are doing it to our advantage. We're now empowered to do that. So I just want to sort of revisit these three factors. I'm not going to rush through, but I do want to have you guys do a little bit of thinking about how transparent are you as an organization, because I'll just tell a quick example of a client that I used this sort of framework with, and it was a tremendous value for them because we started to talk about. So the client was a medical company, and their opportunity, which you can read as challenge, was they were getting a lot of new customers, and their onboarding process, so the process that they had to bring new customers on, to actually getting them to start using their products, was slow and cumbersome. And it turns out, as I started working with them, that they had lots of useful information that they weren't sharing with the customers. It was very accurate information in terms of product SKUs and pricing and all that. And the problem was is that they were keeping all this information to themselves. So when they would onboard a new customer, they would be asking this customer to provide pieces of information in like 5 different segments. So like 2 weeks before they transitioned, they'd have to give this information, then a week before this information, and then 2 days after this information. And the customers were saying, well, you know, we were supposed to transition a month ago. We're still not using your products. You understand that, right? We're still using the old suppliers, the incumbents' products, because we haven't been able to transition our people over to the new ones yet. Whether it's even just getting the physical products in the facilities, but also like our people don't even know that we've switched suppliers for this stuff. So in my conversations with my client, I was saying, well, you must know, you guys do this every day. You've done this 100 times. You must be able to come up with some kind of a framework that you can hand to customers 2 months before they're supposed to convert and say, here's all the things that have to get done. Here's all the things that we do all the time. Here's a bunch of things that we can help you with. And here's some things that are your responsibility, but we can support you on. It's almost like a menu, right? There's 25 steps that we have to go through in order to convert the incumbent's products to ours so that you can start using them on day one. These 12 things we always do. That's our responsibility. These other 5 things on the right, these are always your responsibility. We can't do those for you. We can support you. We can give you examples of what's worked, but you are accountable for those. But these other, what am I left with? 7, 8? These other 7 or 8 in the middle, if you want to, we can do them for you. Might be a little bit of an extra cost, but we can take that burden off of you. So by putting together this framework, this process that they started to share with customers as soon as that customer made the decision to use them, the possibilities were endless. Because now customers were saying, oh, this is great. No one's ever shown this to us before.
A transition plan.
Right? It's effectively what it is, right? No one's ever shown this to us before. We've been through this. We go through this every day with new suppliers of different products. But no one's ever showed us what the steps are. No one's ever showed us, they tell us sort of in a meeting what we're accountable for, but no one ever showed us on a piece of paper, this is what I need to line up, this is what we have to do so I can line up the right people. And frankly, no one's ever offered to do some of this stuff for us. I mean, some of this was internal marketing within the organization to say, we'll help communicate to your people that we're the new supplier. And this is how to use our stuff. So it was a huge opportunity, useful information, accurate information that improved the customer experience. And what ended up happening is not only did this client reduce the onboarding time by 15%. So if you think about that in the context of something that normally takes 6 or 7 weeks, I mean, 15%, you're knocking a week off of that. So now it takes 5 weeks. So now they're recognizing the revenue a little faster. But the other element of that is also the customers are much happier now. Right? The customers see the transition plan. They see the path. They see what's the burden going to be on us so that we can plan for it. So I think it's really important, again, just to understand, going through these 3 factors, to understand better what we're really trying to accomplish here. The other thing, maybe one last point about this client. What we then did is we started putting out more of an industry type transition plan. And this became a competitive advantage for them. So when they were going through competitive bids against their competitors, they would actually start to tell prospective clients, we have this. And we've got, going back to what we talked about for you earlier, we've got clients who will attest to the value of having this plan in place. And of course, what happened, all their competitors started saying, well, we have one too, we have one too. We have an internal one, we just haven't shared it with you, right? Well, too late, right? These guys have already been to the forefront. Their reputation had been significantly improved because they said, we've got it, we're willing to share it, and not only is it useful for us, we know it's useful for you. So when you think about that what I call operational transparency, look through your organization to say, do we have any situations where not only could we improve the customer experience by doing this, but also reduce our own administrative burden, reduce our own costs, reduce our own failure work by sharing it. Now, the last point I want to make on this, before I'm going to get you guys to talk a little bit about it, just to see if you can sort of identify your own opportunity and just think about it for a minute. But the other thing about these factors is you can also turn the lens internally on your organization. So I've focused about operational transparency externally with customers, with business partners. But if you think about it in the context of your own internal organization and how transparent you are with your people, the same applies. So is there useful information that you're not sharing with your people that would be beneficial? Is it accurate? And would it improve the employee experience? Would it improve their empowerment, their engagement? I'll give you a quick example, and then I'll give you a few minutes just to talk at your tables about if something jumps out at you. I was recently working with a client who came to me and said, we need to do a better job of identifying and developing our top performers. I said, okay, so how do you identify your top performers? Well, we just know who they are. And I'm sure you're all the same. You know who your best people are. I said, do your best people know that they're your best people? Do they know that you've identified them as top potentials, top performers, as your best people? I said, well, sure they do, because they get the biggest bonus every year, right? Or they get the extra day off, or this, we give them special projects. I said, no. Have you told them that you've identified them as a high potential or a top performer, or whatever terminology you used, and that you're going to be investing in them more than you invest in other people? Well, no, because they just know. So think about that from the context of internal operational transparency. So if you shared with the entire organization, here's the criteria that we're going to use to identify our top performers. Everybody knows what the criteria is. So if I'm not a top performer, I know why. Because I'm not all of these 5 things. So if you shared what's the criteria we're going to use to identify them. You also share what are the behaviors that we expect from a top performer. Here's the 5 behaviors that the top performers exhibit, or the excellent performers exhibit. So you've now set the expectation on, to be a top performer, this is what it looks like. And it isn't just about, you've got great relationships with it. You put some tangible things that if I'm an employee, I can look at and say, okay, I need to do a couple of things if I'm going to get to exhibiting those 5 behaviors. So you identify the criteria, you set the expectation, you tell the people who are the top performers that they are the top performers. You actually tell them, you say, you have met the criteria, and you tell them what support or additional coaching or whatever it's going to be they're going to get. So as a benefit of being a top performer, we are going to assign you an executive coach. We are going to give you additional projects that are going to stretch you so that you can develop, whatever it might be in your own organization. And then the final part of that is you set the expectation on how performance is going to be measured. So now if I'm anywhere in this organization, whether I'm a top performer or not, I know how you're going to determine the top performers. I know that if I am a top performer, you're going to tell me that. But I also know what that means, what you're going to give me in addition to what I'm already getting. And it isn't just going to be a bonus at the end of the year. You're going to invest in some other kind of development so that I can really improve my own skills. And I know exactly what's expected of me in terms of behavior, and I know how you're going to evaluate my performance. So that's what I say, being able to turn that operational transparency lens internally, that's just an example of how you can do that. So I just want to give you, because we've only got about 15-ish minutes left. That was my 3rd point, by the way. So we've made it through the 3 points. I just want to give you guys maybe 5 or 7 minutes to talk with your table partners. Just if anything jumps out at you, whether it's the external transparency or the internal transparency, that you want to get a little bit of feedback on so that you can walk out of this room with a little more clarity on what you want to do about it.
Personnel information.
Right. It's amazing how powerful transparency can be. Because when you turn the lens internally, what you'll find is a lot of the employees will be saying, well, they really do trust us, right? Instead of the opposite, which a lot of times, well, why are they hiding it from us? Don't they trust us? We're smart people. We know what to do with it. Anything else? So to tie a nice little bow on all this, we talked about 3 areas where you can accelerate growth through operational excellence. The first was identifying your ideal future state and determining the fastest way to get there. So that was the 3 questions I gave you at the beginning, where you focus on identity, meaning what is our ideal future state? You focus on speed, what is the fastest way for us to get there? And you focus on sustainability. How do we continue to make progress towards that ideal future state? Now, part of that sustainability is also continuing to relook at the ideal future state and saying, does it still apply? The second we talked about is increasing the quality of your ideas so we can broaden their impact. So those were the factors that I showed you earlier in terms of how do we determine whether or not an idea is a good one. Does it align with the ideal future state that we've now developed? If it does, what's the impact? Financial, retention, reputation. Are we capable of doing that particular strategy, initiative, idea? And is it feasible? Can it be done? Is it physically possible? Is it organizationally possible? Is it industry possible? You know, the Health Canada example I gave. Could we even sell it if we made it? And then the third is practicing operational transparency, both to reduce your own administrative burden or failure work, but also to improve the customer experience. So again, looking at the three key pieces of three key factors in operational transparency, whether it's external or internal. Do you have useful information that you can share that would be beneficial to someone? Is it accurate? Again, because if you're not sharing accurate information, it's only going to hurt you. And does it improve the customer experience and or reduce your own administrative burden? And I think I started all of this by saying the reason I like the three that I've given you and the reason I chose to use those three, which are also a theme in my new book that's coming out, is because you can implement any or all of these without making any significant financial investment. It doesn't require a new IT system. It doesn't require a whole whack of new people. It just requires a different mindset from those of you in the room that are going to be the catalysts for the change. And it goes back to the story I told about my wife and I in the Peruvian jungle, which is when people were shooting at them, they were still pursuing excellence. So we have no excuse not to pursue that excellence. So the call to action is to think about the ideal future state that you discussed about 90 minutes ago with your table folks. You might have come up with something. You might be closer to something. But hopefully at least you've got some questions to think about so that you can get to where you need to be. In my view, the ideal future state should be one sentence. Right? Again, it's not a mission statement. It's not a value statement. It's not, these are our beliefs, these are our values. It's, what is the ideal future state? If we're coming back together 6 months from now, where would you want to be? What would you want to be able to share with this group to say, this is where I want it to be and this is where I am? Number one in the market, 20% more retention, 5 million more revenue, whatever it might be, that's your ideal future state. That's your foundation. Everything stems from that. So my call to action for you is to not only come up with that one sentence to be able to answer the question, what is your ideal future state? But once you've got it, very clearly communicate it to your teams, to your organizations. Because that helps make sure that everybody's rowing in the same direction. If everybody knows that this is our ideal future state and this is the fastest way for us to get there, then people start self-selecting around ideas. And they don't come to you with the stuff that doesn't have anything to do with the business. They start coming to you in much more productive ways to say, here's an idea because I very clearly understand what we're trying to accomplish and how we're trying to accomplish it. So you'll find that the quality of those ideas will start to pick up significantly, and your ability to execute will also, because you've now given them a framework to think about what is a good idea, what is not such a good idea. 2 quick reminders, then I'll let you go, and I'll finish just before 10:30, just as I promised. All of you in front of you should have a feedback form that looks like this. If any of you want to talk to me further or you have feedback that you want to provide about the workshop, please just fill that out. You can stick it in the folder here, and I will be happy to follow up with you, and we can have a conversation about how we might be able to work together. Second is, as you notice, we have the lovely Rosa at the back who's been videotaping for us. If any of you are willing to provide a video testimonial about today's workshop right after we're done, then I will offer you a free copy of my new book that's coming out, which should be out mid this year. Sorry, we're in 2016. I forgot for a second. So middle of this year to be coming out. I'll be happy to send that to you when it does. You'll get one of the first copies. It's called The Unified Theory of Profitability. 25 ways to accelerate growth through operational excellence. I've covered 3 today. There's 22 more in the book. So think about that before you're thinking about whether or not you want to give a video testimonial. So on that note, I want to say thank you for coming and have a great weekend.
This has been a video of Andrew Miller talking to business owners and executives on accelerating growth through operational excellence. To find out more about how Andrew can help your business, please visit acmconsulting.ca.